Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever and whenever you're listening. In this episode, I wanted to talk about transformation. We've seen organizations go through radical transformation because of coronavirus, pivoting, moving online, working from home, and keeping employees motivated. So how can organizations adapt and succeed in a decade kickstarted by crisis? And how can they use internal and external marketing to succeed? Well, big questions, and that's why I'm super happy to have Gavin Russell on the chat today. He's author of the Transformation Timebomb, 150 practical business adaptations for the digital age. Hi, Gavin. How's it going?
Very good, Chris. Hi. How are you?
Yeah, good. Thanks. Good. What part of the world are you calling from?
Oh, crikey! Sunny Buckinghamshire.
Very nice.
I should say sweltering Buckinghamshire.
Sweltering. Absolutely. It's actually a great time for this country because during coronavirus we're able to talk more about one of our favourite subjects, which is the weather. So this has definitely given us that opportunity to do that.
Oh, it's a double-edged sword, though,
It
Chris.
is.
Because being British, we complain when it's too hot and we complain when it's too cold.
Exactly.
So I don't know where the perfect midpoint temperature is.
I'm not sure.
But we haven't found it yet.
We'll spend eternity trying to find what that answer is. So that's for sure. So let's just start off by you introducing yourself. Tell us a bit about yourself and what you're up to.
Sure, thank you. So I've been, I think it's about 20 years or so within the change and talent space. I started out end of the 90s, early noughties, doing a lot of working in in-house recruitment, and I was doing sort of set up and turnaround or scaling of recruitment teams. Moved into a bunch of change program work as my career developed. So I was working at places like Skype and Microsoft, doing a lot of change program work there. And then not so long ago, I decided to write a book called Transformation Timebomb. Thank you very much for the plug at the beginning. And I published that about a year ago. And then since then, I've been running my own business, a company called Pepper Moth. And that's a talent change and innovation consultancy. It's all about helping businesses become more adaptable, more agile, and crucially more self-sufficient.
Okay, excellent. And well, goodness me, what's happened in the last few months, of course, it's a topic that's been discussed, to massive extent on podcasts, on blogs, on news articles, interviews. But it's like, obviously what's happening now is massively relevant to what you do and your book. So, tell us a bit about your book and, why did you write the Transformation Timebomb?
So it's really a guidebook, and it's a guidebook for change in the digital age. Now, those are broad statements, and they can be a little bit too general. But the idea really about it is to help organizations become, use that phrase again, self-sufficient. I never wanted to write about or offer people magic solutions, because I actually don't think there are any magic solutions. I think each business is so individual and so unique. It's it's at its own inflection point. It has its own competitors. It has its own history. It has its own story. And so a single solution that an external provider sort of comes up and says, well, this will work, isn't necessarily true. Yeah, so sure. What I wanted to do was kind of share a wider understanding of what was going on in the world, in sort of external markets, so the macro forces, let's say, reshaping the world. And I wanted to look at the tangible impacts that were happening to business as a result of those forces, and then provide a framework to help businesses sort of deal with it themselves, using real world examples of where other organizations had tried different things. So the real point about it was to help those businesses develop the answers that were right for them versus copy someone else's ideas, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
And why did I write it? Crikey, Dan. This could be a long answer. So I'll try and make it short. But as I said, I've been working in change and talent for 20 odd years now. And it felt like we'd really reached a tipping point some years ago where what we were doing just wasn't really making a difference. So we weren't actually addressing the new questions that our businesses were facing. We were really good at answering the old questions that our businesses were so used to doing, and we would build these great infrastructures and processes to deal with, but we really weren't addressing the new ones. And I'd been really lucky to work with some excellent businesses and with some really very bright, very capable individuals, and collectively we were struggling. Right? We could see that there was change in demand for talent. We could see there was change in supply of talent. Was changing in definition of talent, but our approaches just weren't dealing with that. They weren't adapting, and they weren't sort of catching up to the critical demands that businesses were facing, and that was creating a really large gap. So I started to wonder if we, and when I say we, I meant I, really understood the problems we needed to solve. And I think I just use a quick example to articulate what I mean by that. As I said, lucky enough to work with some really, really large businesses. And there was one business I worked at within the talent acquisition function. And there were only really two metrics that they really cared about within this function. It was headcount budget, and it was fill rates. So, what's the total amount of people are you going to recruit in the next year, and how quickly you're recruiting them month on month. And I can understand why that was important. It was very much in the traditional sense of what a TA function used to do, which was it was almost like a factory production line, right? We needed to find just enough cogs to fit in the larger machine, and we need to do that efficiently and effectively. Basically, it was to make the organisation keep doing the same things, predefined outputs, predefined budgets, predefined way, right? But the market demand was completely different. The line managers were coming to us and going, we need agility and adaptability. CEOs were talking about innovation. Everyone was talking about experience, relationships, customer loyalty, people being a key factor of production. Klaus Schwab, who's the CEO of the World Economic Forum, has referred to people being the key factor of production. So we knew all of these things, but the production efficiency, what I call production efficiency, wasn't addressing it. Those metrics I just mentioned earlier on were actually diverting us away from what I perceived was the real demand out there. And I struggled to persuade my stakeholders at the time that we needed to change course. So the book really came from this desire to really understand what was going on in the external marketplace. What were the macro forces? What were other companies doing that were working well? What are they experienced? What are they experimented with? See if there are any patterns in there that were core or common to successful businesses, and share that. See if that helped other organizations go on their own journey to figure out what it is that would work for them.
Yeah, nice. It's it's a really compact piece of work. I think you wrote it for CEOs, didn't you, as well? So I think it's kind
predominantly for the C-suite, because it was those individuals that really we have to persuade. I think that's really where the decision-making authority lies. But that doesn't mean to say it's not relevant for other individuals. I always had a mind's eye on how it would be used by the people, by the people within the HR discipline, because absolutely, if people are your key source or factor of production, then the people need to play a big role in whatever happens.
Exactly, it's the classic thing of they need to be at the top table, don't they? So that's actually to read stuff like this, is really important to make sure that they are at the top table.
Yeah, well, there's maybe a podcast for another time, Chris. But I've got a big view that the seat at the table thing is the wrong approach for HR people to take. They should be leaders as much as anyone else on that board. And they should be not partners, but really stepping up and stepping into that place as absolute commercial leaders. But that, I think, might be for another time.
No, absolutely. Yeah, too right. But there's, what I found, particularly interesting was this thing about your book talking about significantly improving performance and commitment through authentic meaning and purpose. Now, see, what I talk about, as lots of marketers do, and in this podcast, it talks about content marketing. Authenticity is something that comes up a lot. So I like to kind of put meat on the bones whenever we kind of use that word. So, can you tell us a bit about this whole thing about how companies that can significantly improve their performance and commitment through authentic meaning and purpose?
Sure. And if you don't mind, I need to, I think, provide a little bit of a background, a bit of a
Yeah,
backdrop of
please do.
context, because it was the journey that I went on when I was writing the book. And it really stems from, and by the way, a lot of the stuff people will have heard beforehand, but so if they'll bear with me whilst I just reframe it, because I think it is important. It really comes from this growing distrust of the establishment. And we're going back a few years here, but talk about the misinformation about Brexit, which was a hot topic in 2016. We talk about the Cambridge Analytica scandal and the impact that had on Facebook. We talk about the VW emissions problem as well. And you've got society and consumers who are starting to become much more skeptical and cynical, and rightly so, about these large organizations that have been, I don't know, a little bit, misleading them in some instances accidentally, in some instances deliberately. And that actually ended up messing up entire industries. So if you take the VW emission scandal, which is a really good one, it was only VW that was cheating, but all car sales were impacted after that. To the point, I think it was, I can't remember the stats off the top of my head, but there's a significant suppression of car sales in that 6 months after VW admitted its fault across all manufacturers. And I think that's a big sign that people are less willing to accept the corporate guff that they get told, and they are far more proactive in finding out their own answers. And I think that's led to a bunch of really different stakeholder behaviors. So consumers now, they measure companies by the role they play in society, their impact on the environment, and their approach to long-term value creation. That's a really important one. And they seek out companies that stand for something a little bit more than that short-term profit, and are actively avoiding businesses that don't positively contribute back to the world around them. And I think you pick up a paper or more accurately, log onto social, you'll see news articles that relate to any element of that. I think importantly, though, investors are also calling for a rethink. And I think a lot of people kind of skirt over the sea change that's going on within capital markets and in the investor markets about how they're approaching businesses. So, the two guys I love to quote on this are Larry Fink, who's the CEO of BlackRock. I think they've got about $1.7 trillion worth of funds under management. So that they're an asset management or a fund management business. And he talks about all CEOs in their portfolio need to think about a positive contribution back to society as much as its shareholders. Seth Klarman, who's the CEO of Bauhaus Group and also a hedge fund billionaire, which is quite nice for him, excuse me, talks about the avoidance of toxic short-termism.
Nice.
The shareholder primacy needs to be replaced with a more balanced approach. And then you've got the talent at the end of this, the employees, who are just like consumers, right? They're increasingly motivated by shared values and ethics. They expect similar experiences to how they'd have as consumers, more personalized, more tailored. Technology has allowed the hypergrowth of an independent marketplace. So individuals, the talent are less beholden, less aligned to large permanent organizations for their careers. And so you've got this shifting balance of power that's moving people away from the traditional concepts and constructs that businesses use to extract performance. And in fact, where I think that's come to is, authentic purpose and meaning are the critical ways that connect all of those stakeholders together. Right? So consumers want to see their organization's values and ethics in action. So I always use the example of Patagonia, who are an outdoor clothing manufacturer.
Yeah, they're great.
I think they did that great campaign years ago. I think it was 2013 or 14, where they did "Don't buy this jacket," and the idea there was, don't buy our products if you don't need them. Right? There's too much conspicuous consumers in the world, that too many resources being used up, and it was a powerful. I won't go on about it, but it was a powerful message, and that was very much at the vanguard of a change in what organizations need to do about broadcasting their culture and about their values and their purpose. The investors have also gone through a similar sort of change. I'm not sure if you've heard of a group, a consortium called B Corp. And B Corp offer a certification to organizations. And that certification means that all organizations have to include in their corporate governance structure social and environmental performance on top of financial performance. Yeah, that's good. Which is a really powerful way, and of making sure that people have, or organizations have, a more balanced approach. Zebras Unite is another one I came across last year. which is an ethical and inclusive movement to counter the existing, the startup and venture capital culture, which is a bit rapacious and short-termist. So there's this movement that I absolutely see within those two communities, and of course, in the talent space, Zappos famously offered $1,000 in their new
$2,000.
hires.
Yeah, it's good.
First,
Yeah.
it was something. I don't think Amazon have copied it, and they do $5,000 or something to leave in your first. Is it 2 weeks or 1 month to test people's commitments?
That's really good. Yeah.
So I see this huge change within performance and commitment that organizations, that consumers, that investors, and that talent are going through. So what does that mean? Why improve performance, and why identify meaning and purpose as important? Well, I think meaning and purpose unifies all stakeholders. So it gives consumers and customers a reason to buy and keep on buying, and that gives you your commercial performance. It gives investors a reason for long-term sustainability. They understand that the long-term success of their investment is tied to this changing consumer sentiment, and so their market performance improves over time as long as they've moved away from this toxic short-termism that Seth Klarman talked about. They see that is a hugely powerful tool or asset that organizations need to have. And of course, candidates, key reason to work hard and to go the extra mile. So it gives organizational performance. And I think as change becomes more frequent and less predictable, that clear North Star of meaning and purpose unifies everyone. It allows people to navigate the choppy seas of change without needing to constantly go back to what am I supposed to be doing here? So it actually liberates organizations a little bit. And I think then it goes on to the commitment part, which is really about trust, honesty, and belief. Purpose demonstrates a commitment to the bigger picture and the longer term, not the short term, as I talked about earlier on. It talks, there's benefits for investors with market relevance, as I said. Customers are much more loyal. But then it goes on to this piece about underwriting culture. And I think positive culture has become a key driver of competitive advantage. Purpose and meaning are actually becoming the cornerstone of that culture. We'll probably go on to this in a little bit in the coming minutes, but I think that you've got an engaging customer experience, which is underwriting innovation. So sort of engaged workers equal better performance. You've got speed, consistency, and risk management. The culture allows people to resolve faster. It's the glue that binds distributed workforces together, because more and more companies are using balanced risk taking. So all of these things are sort of replacing the out of date traditional approaches to performance management. The one size fits all, the secretive thing, with deferred career fulfillment models and annual bonuses. Those are becoming less and less effective, and culture and purpose and authenticity becoming more and more important to unify those teams and extract that performance.
And actually, when it starts with, so often does, when it starts with investors and shareholders, it all trickles down, doesn't it? Which is fantastic. Kind of felt like shouting at Alleluia when you're talking about how there is a change of mindset, and actually seeing that longer term profit equals means being more purposeful as an organisation.
I've seen more change on that front. I've seen more change in the last 2 or 3 years than I've seen in the previous 20. And I've been so used, and I'm sure some people listening to this will have had a similar experience. So many times I've been at a change meeting or a strategy session, and the answer has been, we're not going to do that because the investors don't want it.
Yeah.
And the amount of times I've heard that, which is the business doesn't want that. It's about quarterly, it's about quarterly profits. And I think that has been the refrain correctly, I hasten to add, that has been the refrain for the previous 30, 40, 50 years. But I think that is decreasingly true. And that gives me huge hope for the future.
See, I'm going to mention another book here, but actually it kind of ties in very nicely what you're talking about. So it was written back in 2011. So David Jones was at the time CEO of Havas Worldwide, and I work for Havas People. So and he wrote a book called Who Cares Wins? Why Good Business is Better Business. And he does very much talk about looking at how companies that have performed better on the FTSE in the long term are the ones who have businesses with more of a social conscience, and so I think that's another thing worth adding to the reading list for our
Absolutely.
listeners.
I'm going to add another one in there. A book that influenced me greatly when I was evolving these ideas was one by a guy called Roger L. Martin, and it's called Fixing the Game. And it's cheap as chips on Amazon. So, if people want to go off and buy it, I'd recommend buying it. And there's a strong economic element to what he's doing, but the short version of what he said is essentially what you've just said. It really sort of undermines this whole concept of short-termism and thinking that investment should only be playing the markets, right? Because he talks about the difference between the real market and the expectations market. And too many organizations play in this expectations market and therefore change the entire governance of their businesses based upon what the market expects, not actually what is required of that business and what consumers would like. And fascinating diatribe that I recommend anyone had to read off.
Oh, nice. We'll drop them into the episode description when I publish this, definitely. So it starts with investors in so many cases, doesn't it? Then that actually trickles down. It actually gives license for organizations to actually do the things that investors are happy for those organizations to do. And so I think this is, definitely it's forcing organizations to really think about those things because they know it's something that will ring true with investors, and increasingly so over the next few years. So I think when it comes to our thing about having meaning and purpose, we all need some sort of meaning and purpose in our life, whether it's at work or in any parts of life. I think when it comes to, say, employer marketing, then actually I think there's more of a pressure on organizations to be more true or truthful in their communications. I won't say truthful, actually, that's not necessarily fair. It's about, and I think you mentioned it in your book actually, about showing, not telling. So actually this thing about going, well, if we want happy clients, happy customers, we need to have happy staff, because there's absolutely no other way, unless you're shunting software with no support or anything. Ultimately a business makes money through its people. So if you have happier people, you have happy clients and customers, and you have happy shareholders. You have a successful business. So I think
a sustainable business, and
yes,
sustainable
business,
is I think
absolutely,
the key shift
absolutely.
Here, because it is not about what I perceive as the shift is now moving away from that short term. How do we get our quarterly numbers higher, which breeds so many negative behaviors throughout an organization,
for sure,
to how do we build a sustainable business that people are going to want to be loyal to and continue to buy from, because that then overrides some of the problems that we get in increasing market fluctuations, which the world has been going through consistently or dramatically over the last 8 months. Today on the news, I think we're officially in recession. How do you build a recession-proof business? Well, you actually really look at your customers first and foremost, and you look at what drives loyalty with them. And absolutely, that's where this manifests.
Yeah, definitely. It's I think when it comes to think about what that actually then means for when organizations are looking at their talent attraction and looking at promoting their organization. I think you touch on it in your book again about that whole transparency piece, and also kind of organizations trusting their employees. So I think that in itself is definitely a hat tip to organizations using their employees more, and that's more not just in the terms of, well, can you join us in a photo shoot, can you be in a talking heads video. It's about entrusting them to actually play the big role that they should have in employer brand, because ultimately their experience is the employer brand. So therefore you need to give that license to those employees to tell their story, which is part of the bigger employer brand story.
100%. Yeah, it's about this authenticity,
Mm.
because with the data revolution that we've had, information revolution, I should say. Organisations are so much more transparent. All consumers, candidates, whoever, are able to find out information from each other. So if you think of the sharing economy, it's built on this idea that technology has linked buyers and sellers and cut out the middleman. And that's the same is true of information, and that's absolutely the same is true of when it comes to organizations and employment opportunities at organizations. And so with that in mind, what candidates or job seekers will be looking for is, I want to know what an authentic experience is going to be like working at this organization. I'm not going to buy the top-down broadcast messaging because I just don't trust it. I'm starting off with this position of skepticism. So I'm not going to buy that. I'm going to go to my peers and I'm going to find out what it's like. So, that's why we've got, had the huge growth in sort of peer rating sites over the last 10 years, because that's where the information is now being collated and shared. And I think having that, having employees being the front and center of organizational culture and the values and ethics of that business is an inevitable continuation of that trend.
Yeah, definitely. And I think with when I started this podcast back in February, I kind of kickstarted around findings from Gallup. It was a few years old, but it's still very relevant. Gallup stated the global workforce, which is 85% of employees aren't engaged or actively disengaged at work. So, and that equates to this crazy number, $7 trillion in lost productivity. So actually there's an issue there about, obviously getting the right people in, truly getting the right people in that really do fit your culture, really do, agree and can be part of your values and your mission. And if you're not truthful right at the very beginning, and you don't then continue to communicate with your employees and be kind of truthful and authentic with them throughout the journey, you're going to have that 85% there for a very long time.
Absolutely. Well, I was just
on.
going to go on and say, what I've witnessed is exactly that, but I've seen the pendulum shift in how we approach culture. So a lot of and branding, how a lot of organizations have traditionally approached it has been, here is our culture, here are our organizational values, here are our ethics. And they've kind of gone, well, I've addressed it. We're doing a great job on that. But it's been broadcast, and then it's been about compliance. So it's been about, here's what we are, join our business. You need to align to our values. You need to conform. And by the way, this annual performance review, that's a process where we fix you each year to make us more like us, right? And it seems totally dysfunctional to me when you've got changing generations coming through the workforce, and certainly the younger generations, Generation Z, I think, started officially, that cohort joined the workforce last year. With completely different employment aspirations and expectations. They're not going to fix themselves to fit in. They're not going to drop their values to comply. They're looking to share. And I think that's a huge change from where we have approached culture and branding over the last few years, is that it's about sharing those values and attributes and allowing people to contribute back into it. And I kind of rail a little bit at the at Google. And so Google, apologies to any Googlers who are listening to this, but I rail at the Nooglers thing, which is the training camp that you kind of go in at Google. And as a Noogler, a new Googler, you have to go through this process to become more like Google. And I kind of think that's fundamentally flawed, because when the pressure comes, when the chips are down, people won't follow those values. They'll revert to their own values. They'll revert to type, because it's almost part of the limbic brain that has that flight or flight response, which is when the pressure's on, this is how I behave. So you kind of want to not indoctrinate people in your values. You want to start off with finding people with the same values as you and allow them to grow them with you. Otherwise, they're not going to share in that performance.
And actually, that's where, if you look at my career of oh God, like 19, 19 years. It's very much moved from, or the need has moved from ad. You hope that ad convinces someone to make what could be a life-changing decision, certainly a decision that has a big impact on your life, which is choosing that next step or first step in your career. And then hoping the interview process goes right on both sides, and then you get the job. Whereas now, because of that transparency caused by social media, because there is so much access to information, actually there's now a need to make sure that even before someone applies, they don't just look at the benefits of a role and don't just look at the job description. They fundamentally have some sort of relationship with that company before they apply. So that for me definitely taps into the principles of content marketing, where you're developing consistent, strategic and consistent content that is providing information, advice, opinion, support and inspiration to people even before they join you, so that actually when they do join you, or they do actually have an interview with you, it's like, well, I know you guys. Actually, we talk about brand, when we talk about like relationships that brands have with their customers. Actually, a relationship between an employer brand and its existing or future customers, or existing employees and future employees, is really important. And actually, a relationship with a company in an employment perspective could actually last the whole of a career. You just may not be working for that company for the whole of that career.
Absolutely.
Someone who started out kind of maybe looking at a company for early careers, an apprenticeship or a graduate role, but actually for whatever reason it didn't work out. Maybe it wasn't the right time for that individual.
Yeah.
But they have that good experience. They really understand the organization. And when it's like 10 years later, and when there's a senior role available, or more senior role available, and when it costs more to find those people, then actually it's going to be easier to hire that person, because they're kind of already convinced already. So that for me is why content marketing is, I think, really important in employer marketing.
And I think it will become increasingly important. So, I talk about, it's going back to the book, I talk about positioning from a marketing perspective at a corporate level. So, business positioning or business marketing. But I think this is absolutely just as true, just as applicable within the employment marketing space, which is organizations need to reposition themselves. Employment branders, employment marketers need to reposition their organization in the lives of their users, not in the minds of their users. It sounds like a weird sentence, but what I mean from that is exactly what you've just said, is all talented users. They're not one-time buyers, right? Because of this interconnected web of information that's flowing around, everyone becomes important. They become, potential members of your community, not cogs in a machine. So there's this shift away from this mechanistic approach to employment marketing: feed the top of the pipeline, chug, spit something out at the end of it, fill the role, and move on to the next. We're moving away, and I think we have to move away from this idea, this concept that it's almost a robotic process that we're going through to create the machine, to move to a much more organic sense, almost thinking of organizations as organisms, as living entities that are constantly flexing and adapting in the real world to the real environment. And so that means that recruitment marketing has to look outside the sales funnel, right? They almost are, the mindset has to be treat people as all assets that will grow in value. At some point, we move from being employers of jobs to enablers of careers. So it's a mindset shift that we've got to go through. And as brands and experience increasingly become one and the same, it is about, exactly as you said, the content and developing those consistent and congruent experiences throughout the talent lifecycle, not just at the point of purchase. And again, that's one of the key things that I perceive changing, is we have to move away from employment marketing as it's about recruitment, because it isn't.
It's transactional.
We have to move away. We have to look at it from the user's perspective. A user doesn't look at an organization and go, well, I'm quite happy to have one experience as I'm being hired, I have a completely different experience, which is completely different when I'm an employee, and then I have a third horrible experience when I'm an alumni. And then obviously there's the experience that sits outside of that when you haven't actually been through a process. Why would you have 4 different processes for that? Why wouldn't they be consistent and congruent? Because you're creating these really, if you do that, you're creating these really disjointed negative approaches that will reduce performance, that will reduce engagement, that will reduce productivity, that will reduce profitability. Because people will just go, well, hang on a second, I joined this business and they said X, and now I'm in it, and the feeling is Y. So I just, that whole idea that we have to connect it throughout the whole talent life cycle, that whole value chain, is absolutely pivotal.
Definitely, and it costs a business if they get the wrong people in, doesn't it? Because if turnover is an issue, then actually that is a massive cost and massive time sapper for an organization. So yeah, to put people off right at the beginning because it just doesn't feel right, or to get the right people who won't necessarily think about organization because they really understand that what they're trying to achieve in terms of the organization's purpose is fantastic. And I think that thing about kind of meaning and purpose is increasingly important when we're kind of moving more towards organizations needing people that can adapt to what they do, and it's like professional services, needing to kind of take more of a consultative route to things and going, well, I'm going to call upon a number of skills of mine or someone else's to help solve a problem. So actually, instead of just purely fixing it on a job role that can be very well fixed, actually focusing on purpose as well, so that then when you have more jobs that are out there that are more fluid, so to speak, you still have something to anchor it on, which is meaning and purpose.
Well, absolutely. I'd argue that we're, I said at the beginning of our conversation, there's the changing definition of talent. And I think that's a really important element in this part of the conversation, because we're moving away from talent definition that's defined by content, as in what have you done beforehand, to talent definition that's defined by value creation. What can you do in the future? And so, this is, why do we have job adverts that advertise for skills that we're probably not going to use? Because if you think that technology is changing so rapidly, at Moore's law, you've got a doubling in power and a halving in price every 18 months. Technologies are coming and go faster than we've ever seen them beforehand. New competitors coming and going faster than we've ever seen them beforehand. Why are we advertising roles with, you must have got 5 years worth of X, when that technology, or that, let's say it's a programming language, is probably not going to be in use in that way in 12 months time. You must have run budgets of blah, blah, blah. Well, I don't see how recruiting the skills of the past enables you to focus on delivering the performance of the future. So we need to be focusing on a completely different set of skills, which are, which will vary from organization to organization, but they won't be based upon those transactional tasks that people did in the past. They'll be about the results that they could deliver in the future. So that might be about entrepreneurialism, or it might be about fault fixing, or it might be about analyzing huge data sets, or pattern recognition. So there's this whole shift that we're going through already. This is already happening. It's not some future of work email that you might get from someone. This is happening today.
Absolutely.
I still haven't figured out why, if you go online and look at a job description, it will say, we want you to do all these amazing things, have this amazing career with us. Here's a list of 20 tasks that you must complete in the way that we tell you to complete it. It's almost, it's a contradiction, right? Here's the past. Please repeat the past. We want you to do the future, but please, here's all the things that we valued in the past. It just doesn't make any sense.
No, as you say, I think there are things in here that could easily be another episode for sure. It's good chat. I think when it comes to the kind of content from what we talked about, the kind of content that organizations should be looking at. It's, of course, there are the kind of functional information, which is about a role, whether it is more fixed or more fluid, depending on the organization. But also on top of that, there is, I think if you're thinking about content, it's going to be, story-based content, and that's not, or I like to say, not like no day is the same content, or lights, camera, action content, which is, someone says something and it could be any organization. It's stories. Stories are things that tap into people's empathy for someone else. So actually, those stories that do very much shout values without even mentioning those values. Going back to the show don't tell. I think, tapping into the experiences people are having, and the classic thing, and organizations have been doing this during COVID and lockdown, is showing that experience that people are having while working from home. A great example, I love, I used to work with Next a few years ago. Actually, I was involved in setting up their Instagram accounts, and they got Life at Next, which is fantastic, and they do that really, really well. And then there's also expertise, especially when you're looking in more of the experienced higher world, where actually you want to work with people that really know their stuff, and you want to feel, if I come and join this organization, I'm going to be working with those people and that kind of thinking. And Netflix is a great example of that. They have a We Are Netflix podcast that actually started out as an internal podcast for engineers. And Netflix have a bit of an advantage because they're a massive organization and are in the homes and on the phones of many people, hence why they're so successful. But that sharing of expertise is, I think, really important. And then I think this thing, and especially with the graduates in the early career space, but I think still relevant for more experienced hires, is that thing about providing advice. How can you expect someone to go through a recruitment process without really knowing what it's about? Like properly knowing what it's about and being properly prepped for it, and feeling that they are, doing themselves justice when they do it. Or actually, and I was involved in this I did work for the prison service a few years ago with prison officers, and one of the first things you did in an assessment centre, which was an all-day thing, was do a fitness test. So we made sure there was fitness test content, because if you don't pass that fitness test, you go back home. You wasted.
Interesting. I didn't know that. That's fascinating.
So I think that thing about advice as well, I think, is really important, because HR sit on so much knowledge about the recruitment process, or so much knowledge about what you do with that next step in your career, or that first step in your career. They should absolutely tap into that and use that content as part of their marketing. Although they may not feel it's marketing. One of my other episodes, I talk with Nick Francis at Casual Films, and saying, what kind of content would an organization create if they saw themselves as a media company or a broadcaster? What we're going to be doing for our readership or our listeners or our viewers, and their content will look very different. And I think it would look like the kind of content that we've been talking about.
Yeah, I completely agree. I've seen some organisations do a fantastic job on this. For me, it goes back to this point I mentioned earlier on about positioning in the lives, not just the minds of talent, and about enabling people's long-term success. If everyone's an asset that's going to grow in value, you're not selling, come and join our firm at this particular time. It's how we helping you to become more successful. So the content there is not just about, this is about us, because we both know that content marketing is not necessarily about what you want to say, it's what people want to talk about. So there's a shift there in the focus of the content. And I think that's incredibly important when we get onto this, the idea of empowering people's success. Now, PwC, I'm going to use, because I heard this story, crikey, it must have been 15 years ago. And I don't know how true it is, but PwC came up with a website for its alumni. And they spent more money on their website for their alumni than they did for their new hires, because it was absolutely about connecting with a talent pool of individuals that they'd already figured out had a shared set of values and motivations. And it was about enabling their continued success. And the reason PwC did that was because that allowed them to hire back this great talent after they'd gone off and done work in industry, and therefore they'd have more experience. They'd be more valuable as assets to PwC, but they'd also still be really engaged with that organisation because they'd made that effort. And I think I saw something not so long ago, again from PwC, which was called Career Advisor. And it wasn't a careers page. It was a site where candidates went for career advice. So it was you didn't have to apply for a job at PwC. It was a site that was, we're going to help you be successful in your career. How can we help you? Which is exactly ties into what I was saying earlier on about assets that grow in value. Users, not buyers. It is it is the right way to help those communities thrive, because when you need to access that talent, who are the ones you've ignored or the ones you've developed a relationship with?
Yeah, definitely. I remember being in a meeting with a client once saying, I don't think we're in the job of filling applications. We're actually, getting applications in. We're in the job of just helping people make the right choice, and prodding them towards the right direction. And if they end up applying for us, then fantastic. I think that thing about, what can I do for them, as opposed to, okay, what do we need to sell here? Which, is relevant for, all of branding and marketing.
Yeah,
I think is a really, really important thing. So we're nearly done on time, but it's been great chatting. I think we've talked about a few a lot of this has been around, giving advice and, some tips and prompts. But let's have a think about, what there's a meeting that's happening next. So it's an HR meeting that's happening next. What should be an agenda item in that next meeting?
So for me, the first thing that goes on it is it's about the relationship that employment branding has with corporate and consumer branding. I mentioned it earlier on that I think we've got organizational culture, and employment branding is going to become a cornerstone of corporate branding. So, and it therefore becomes a cornerstone of a business. An organization is its authentic face. Sorry, it's an organization's employees are its authentic face. If you think of the retail banks at the moment, any advert by a retail bank at the moment, or by Amazon, or you name it, features its employees, right? Because
Absolutely.
that's the authentic face. So the first thing that any HR function would need to do is, how do I work closely with the corporate and the consumer branding teams, because those are converging, those messages are converging. And if you don't have convergence and clarity on that message, that's going to create problems further down the line. And I think that's really high priority. The next for me is, it's really basic, and I think a lot of organizations do this already, but do you actually know what experiences people have with your business? You might know what experiences they have at particular bits in your business. Maybe, from first stage to second stage interview, or from, website visits through to application. But outside of that more mechanistic side, what are those experiences that people are having throughout the talent life cycle? So I think every organization should start there and focus on the moments of truth, those key parts in that journey that are make or break parts. And that's not just in the talent acquisition cycle. That's in, things like promotion review. That's in things like offboarding. That's it. That's in the, and obviously it depends on each organization what those moments of truth are. Not what's true in one organization is not going to be true in others. But I think really need to focus on what are those moments of truth. What is the experience that people are really having, and make sure that those are as good as they can be. And the third part is about community building. I think every organization, every HR organization needs to look about how it's building communities, proactively building communities, not reactively, to give them almost that access to that on-demand talent, because that goes back into what you were saying about storytelling and about useful content. You need to have a community. You need to have dialogue with these communities to know what they want to talk about, so you can produce the right content that engages them. So when things, you have a demand as an organization, you've got a pool of people there that are not only appropriate, but they're engaged.
I'm going to throw in another agenda item there. I think is, and I suppose I would say this, but given what I do, but I think there's that thing about making sure that you find people or get people in organization within the team who understand marketing, but from a talent perspective, like really understand marketing.
Yeah.
And when you have that, then you have someone who does talk about the things we've talked about, thinking people as users, thinking about a long-term relationship here, thinking about community building. I think you find those people in the organization who actually have that marketing hat on, but fundamentally understand how marketing can help individuals do something which are quite important in their lives, which is having that job, that first job, or their next job in their career.
And I would say the same is true back to marketing. It is to have a connection with marketing where they understand the role of employment brand and a talent brand within the consumer and in the corporate messaging structure.
Definitely. Well, that's been a good chat. Thank you very much. It's starting to get hotter actually. My room, which is nicely not soundproof, but it's not, it's I haven't got many windows open, so I'm sweltering a bit, but
time to hydrate.
Time to hydrate, get my water out. But it's thank you very much for
pleasure. Really enjoyed it.
For having the time, and take care and catch up soon.
Definitely. Thanks, Chris.
Cheers.
Bye.
Thanks for listening, and don't forget to follow or subscribe for the latest episode drops. And don't forget to get in touch if you want to contribute.